In the closing months of World War II, Japan built a weapon so large, so ambitious, that even its own engineers called it impossible. It was a submarine, but not like any before. It could travel across the Pacific, launch aircraft from beneath the waves, and vanish before anyone knew it was there. Its name was I-400, the largest submarine ever built at that time. At 400 feet long, it was more than a vessel. It was an underwater aircraft carrier, designed to change the course of the war. It carried 3 folded bombers inside its massive hangar planes that could rise from the ocean and strike anywhere on Earth. Its mission: to attack the American mainland, to bomb the Panama Canal, and cripple the heart of the Allied supply lines. The I-400 was not designed merely to patrol the seas. It was built to strike fear across oceans. Japan's high command called it Sentoku, the secret special submarine. Its mission was a plan so bold, so impossible, that even German engineers dismissed it as fantasy. But Japan believed it could turn the tide of the war with one final devastating blow. The I-400's orders were sealed in a red envelope, locked inside the captain's quarters. Only when the ship was halfway to its destination could the envelope be opened. The crew didn't know their true target. They only knew it would be the farthest reach of the Empire's revenge. When the envelope was finally opened, the men gathered in silence. Their destination wasn't a naval base or a fleet. It was the Panama Canal. If Japan could destroy the locks and flood the Atlantic route, the Allies' lifeline between oceans would collapse. It would be a strike so powerful that the world might think Japan still had the power to win. The plan was daring beyond reason. The I-400 and her sister ships would travel halfway across the world, surface near the canal, and launch their 3 Seiran aircraft under cover of night. Each plane carried a 1,800-pound bomb, enough to destroy a lock gate and cripple the canal for months. But there was another, darker version of the plan, one whispered among senior officers. If the canal attack failed, the submarines were to turn towards San Francisco or New York, striking the American mainland in a final act of vengeance. The crew trained in secret. They launched their bombers at sea, practiced surfacing and unfolding wings in total darkness. Every man aboard knew that their mission would likely end with their own deaths. Yet they pressed on, believing they were Japan's last shadow in the water, the final weapon of a dying empire. But even as they prepared for glory, the war around them was collapsing. American forces were closing in on the homeland, and the sea that once protected Japan had become its grave. By the time the I-400 left port for her mission, her enemy already ruled the skies, and fate was waiting somewhere in the deep. The men who sailed it were hand-picked, sworn to secrecy, and trained for a mission so secret that even Japan's high command barely knew the full plan. They were told they would be ghosts of the ocean, unseen, unstoppable, unforgettable. When the I-400 finally slipped beneath the waves in December 1944, it carried 144 men, 3 aircraft, and the last desperate hope of the Empire. It vanished into the Pacific, moving silently through darkness, its engines humming like a heartbeat beneath the surface of the dying war. No one knew then, not even its crew, that they were sailing into history's greatest underwater mystery. Because before the war could end, the I-400 itself would disappear. The I-400 slipped out of Kure Harbor under a shroud of night. No music, no farewell, only the hiss of ballast tanks and the quiet hum of diesel engines fading into the Pacific darkness. The men on deck looked back one last time at Japan's shoreline, knowing they might never see it again. For days, the submarine cruised east, deeper into a world of endless water and whispering storms. Inside her steel hull, 144 men lived shoulder to shoulder, eating, sleeping, and waiting in the dark. The air was thick with oil and fear. They spoke little, their eyes fixed on the red glow of control panels and the soft heartbeat of the engines beneath their feet. Above them, the ocean stretched for thousands of miles, empty yet alive with unseen danger. American patrols now ruled the Pacific, their sonar listening for any hint of life below. Every sound, every creak of metal could betray their position. The captain ordered complete silence. Even footsteps had to be muffled. The crew moved like ghosts through the corridors of steel. Days turned into weeks. Salt gathered on their skin, sweat soaked their uniforms, and the hum of the machinery became their only companion. The cooks rationed rice. The air grew foul. Some of the younger sailors began to whisper that the sea itself was against them, that the spirits of the dead were following the sub. Then, one night, the I-400 dove deeper than ever before. The lights dimmed. Pressure groaned through the hull, and the world turned black. The captain stood in silence, eyes fixed on the depth gauge. They were now invisible, too deep for sonar, too far from rescue. For 3 hours, no one spoke. When they finally surfaced, the sea was calm. Stars shimmered across the water, and the captain allowed the men to step out for air. They climbed onto the deck, thin, pale, exhausted, and looked at the horizon. Nothing. Only the endless dark. But in that stillness, they didn't know that above those stars, American bombers were already moving toward Japan. The empire they were risking their lives for was crumbling behind them. And their voyage, the longest submarine mission in history, was sailing straight into silence. By August 1945, the I-400 had crossed the vast Pacific, unseen, undetected, and utterly alone. The crew believed they were days away from making history. Inside the pressurized hangar, the Aichi M6A Seiron bombers gleamed in dim light, folded like sleeping birds waiting to strike. Every man aboard rehearsed his role by memory launch sequence, fueling, liftoff. They were ready. But one evening, as the crew prepared for final orders, the radio crackled with a strange broken transmission. The operator turned pale. He listened, rewound the tape, and played it again. The message was short, cold, unbelievable. The Emperor has surrendered. The war is over. At first, no one moved. The captain demanded confirmation. Another message came hours later. Same words, same ending. Japan had fallen. The men refused to believe it. Some shouted, others wept. A few even accused the Americans of sending a fake transmission to break their spirit. How could it be over? They were still alive, armed, ready to strike the most powerful submarine fleet Japan had ever built. The captain gathered his officers. In his hands were 2 sets of orders. One from the war, one from his conscience. Officially, he was to surrender to the Americans. Unofficially, he still held the pride of the Imperial Navy and the guilt of failure. For hours, they debated under the red lights of the control room. Some wanted to carry out the mission anyway, to die as warriors and sink the Panama Canal or an American base before surrendering. Others said it would be meaningless, the empire no longer existed. Finally, the captain made his decision. He ordered the hangar flooded, the Seiron aircraft destroyed. No trace of their secret weapon would fall into enemy hands. The crew watched as the planes, their pride and purpose, sank slowly beneath the waves. Each man felt a part of himself go with them. They were no longer soldiers. They were ghosts, drifting between war and peace, carrying secrets the ocean would never tell. For the next few days, the I-400 wandered the Pacific without destination. No orders, no enemies, no home. The silence inside the steel hull was heavier than ever. And as the sun set on the Empire of Japan, the world's largest submarine, once built to change history, simply disappeared into it. August 27, 1945. The Pacific Ocean lay calm, quiet, in a way it hadn't been for years. Far from Japan, a massive shadow moved beneath the surface, rising slowly toward the light. It was the I-400, surfacing for what would be the final time. The captain stood on the conning tower, his uniform faded, eyes hollow from exhaustion. Beside him, a white bedsheet fluttered in the wind, a flag of surrender. Below deck, the crew sat in silence. Some clutched photographs. Others stared at the floor. For men trained to die before dishonor, surrender was a wound deeper than any battle scar. On the horizon, the unmistakable outline of an American destroyer appeared, the USS Blue. The Americans had received the message. We are a Japanese submarine. We wish to surrender. They didn't believe it at first. The I-400 was a legend, a rumored giant the Allies had never actually seen. But now, as it broke the waves, the truth rose with it. When the American boarding party approached, they were stunned. The submarine towered over their ship 400 feet of steel and mystery. It was larger than anything they had ever encountered underwater. One sailor reportedly whispered, "It's like something out of the future." The Japanese officers lined up on deck, heads bowed. The American commander raised his binoculars and called out, "Identify your ship." The Japanese captain answered, his voice barely above the wind. I-400. Sentoku class. Mission canceled. The Americans boarded carefully, weapons drawn, not knowing what they'd find inside. What they saw left them speechless. An entire hangar within a submarine. 3 aircraft folded neatly inside. Massive engines humming quietly in surrender. They realized in that moment what could have been. A weapon capable of striking New York, Panama, or Washington without warning. The American flag was raised over the I-400. For the first time, its engines were silenced by another nation's command. The Japanese crew stood at attention, tears streaming down their faces. No shots were fired. No orders shouted. Only the sea, calm and endless, watching the end of one of its greatest secrets. That day, in the heart of the Pacific, 2 enemies stood together, one victorious, one broken, and the world's largest submarine surrendered to history. When the American sailors stepped inside the I-400, they didn't realize they were walking into a machine years ahead of its time. The first thing they noticed was the size, endless corridors, massive engines, and rooms large enough to hold aircraft. It wasn't just a submarine. It was a factory of war hidden beneath the sea. As their flashlights swept across the walls, they found folding bombers with wings designed to unfold like origami. 3 sleek Sea-Ron attack planes, each armed with a 1,800-pound bomb stored inside a pressurized hangar. The sailors were speechless. One of them muttered, "My God, they could have hit anywhere." The engineers among the boarding party began to realize the magnitude of what they were seeing. The I-400 had double the range of any American submarine. It could travel around the world without refueling. It had a watertight aircraft hangar, a launch catapult, and even a system for recovering the planes after their mission, all while staying submerged and invisible to radar. Every inch of the sub told a story of desperation and brilliance. The Japanese had built something the world wasn't ready for, and yet it had arrived too late. The Americans collected blueprints, photographed every panel, and took samples of the sub's metal and engines. They found encrypted maps, mission notes written in neat Japanese handwriting, and sealed orders that would never be carried out. In the mess hall, untouched rice bowls still sat on tables frozen in time. The bunks were lined with folded uniforms. On a small shelf near the captain's quarters, an officer's diary contained the final entry: "We sail for the Emperor and for the ocean. If we are never seen again, may the sea remember us." It was not just a weapon they had found. It was a tomb of dreams, a machine that represented everything Japan had poured into the final days of the war. When the Americans finally left the sub, they looked back one last time. Even in defeat, the I-400 stood as a marvel, a monument to human invention and the madness of war. And as the hatch was sealed, one officer whispered, "This thing could have changed everything if it had come just a little sooner." The war had ended, but the secrets of the I-400 were just beginning. After its surrender, the submarine and its sister ships were towed to Pearl Harbor for study. American engineers, naval officers, and intelligence agents swarmed over the vessels, documenting every wire, every bolt, every innovation. What they found stunned them, a generation of technology far beyond anything in the Allied arsenal. The I-400 could travel farther than any U.S. submarine. It carried aircraft inside a watertight hangar. Its periscope had advanced optics unlike anything Western science had produced. And its engines, twin diesels with intricate fuel control systems, made it almost silent at cruising speed. This was not just a relic of war. It was a glimpse of the future. But there was a problem. The Cold War had already begun. The Soviet Union, now an uneasy ally turned rival, demanded access to Japan's captured technology. Under post-war agreements, the U.S. would have to share all advanced weapons recovered from Japan. For American intelligence, that was unacceptable. The I-400 could not fall into Soviet hands. So, a quiet order was given Operation Road's End. Its purpose: erase the existence of the Sentoku submarines. In the spring of 1946, under the guise of weapons testing, the U.S. Navy towed the I-400 and several others out to sea, far from land, into waters deeper than a mile. No reporters, no records. Only a handful of officers knew the truth. There, under a bright Hawaiian sun, American charges were set. Explosives lined the hull, the hangar, the control tower. The engineers who had studied her stood silently as the countdown began. At 0, the Pacific erupted. The shockwave rolled over the waves, and when the smoke cleared, the I-400 was gone. No ceremony, no witnesses, no trace. The most advanced submarine of the Second World War had been erased deliberately, not by the enemy, but by the very hands that had captured her. In official Navy reports, it was listed simply as disposed of at sea. But the truth lingered in whispers that a weapon capable of rewriting history had been buried to protect the future. For nearly 60 years, the I-400 was nothing more than a myth. Sailors spoke of it in half-remembered stories. Historians wrote about it with question marks. Some said it had been dismantled. Others swore it still lay somewhere in the dark, sleeping beneath the waves. Then, in 2005, the Pacific finally gave up one of its secrets. A team of deep-sea explorers from the Hawaii Undersea Research Laboratory set out to map the ocean floor off Oahu. Their submersible moved silently through the cold black depths 700 meters below the surface. Sonar pinged softly against rock and coral. Then, something enormous appeared on their screens. At first, it looked like a cliff. Then, as the lights swept across the shape, the truth emerged. A steel hull, curved and massive, covered in coral and silt. The letters were faint, but still visible. I-400. The team fell silent. They had found the ghost. The submarine lay on her side, her hangar doors still sealed shut. The deck gun rested quietly in the sand. Inside, the passageways were filled with shadows, but the outline of the aircraft hangar remained intact, as if waiting for orders that would never come. The cameras drifted through the wreck, capturing haunting images. A rusted control room. The captain's chair tilted sideways. Dials frozen. Mid-turn. One diver whispered over the comms, "It feels like the crew just left yesterday." The ocean had preserved her not as a weapon, but as a monument. Time had softened her steel, but not her presence. Even after 6 decades underwater, the I-400 was still commanding, still magnificent, still alive. In a strange, quiet way. The discovery made headlines worldwide. Japan's news outlets called it the return of the Emperor's shadow. American historians called it the most advanced submarine ever built before its time. But for those who saw it up close, the feeling was different. It wasn't triumph. It was reverence and a deep sadness. The wreck wasn't just metal. It was memory, a reminder of genius born from desperation, and of lives that vanished into silence. And as the submersible lights faded, the I-400 disappeared once more into the deep, back to its resting place among the ghosts of the Pacific. When the war ended, not every man who served on the I-400 returned home. Out of 144 sailors, dozens vanished their names, listed as missing at sea. Some were captured by American forces and sent to camps in Guam and Hawaii, while others disappeared before surrender, lost somewhere in the vastness of the Pacific. For years, families waited. Mothers, wives, and children wrote letters that were never answered. The Japanese Navy told them nothing, only that their sons had served with honor on a special mission. No details, no bodies, just silence. Those who survived rarely spoke of what they'd seen. When asked about the I-400, They would pause, look down, and whisper. It was a ship the world was never meant to know. A few of the surviving crewmen lived long enough to see the submarine rediscovered in 2005. When shown the footage, some cried, others smiled faintly, as if recognizing an old friend sleeping peacefully in the dark. One elderly sailor said softly, "We thought she was gone forever." But the ocean? It remembered. For them, the I-400 was more than a machine. It was their youth, their fear, and their final connection to a vanished world. The sea had kept its promise to guard their secret and to cradle their story until the world was ready to hear it again. The I-400 never fired a single shot in war. It never launched its aircraft, never struck the Panama Canal, never carried out its final orders. In military terms, it changed nothing. But in human history, it changed everything. It marked the moment when war left the land and sky and descended into the deep. It proved that no part of the world was beyond reach, that human ingenuity could weaponize even the silence of the ocean. The I-400 was not just a submarine. It was an idea, the idea that one machine could alter the balance of power across an entire planet. Its design inspired generations of engineers. Modern ballistic missile submarines, capable of launching warheads from beneath the waves, carry the same spirit, the same philosophy born from that Japanese dream beneath the Pacific. The legacy of the I-400 lived on, quietly, in the DNA of every submarine built since. But for the men who built it, and those who sailed inside it, the cost was far greater. They gave their lives to a vision that arrived too late, a marvel of technology trapped in the dying breath of an empire. When historians speak of the I-400 today, they call it the giant that history forgot. Yet in forgetting it, we forget what it represented, the brilliance and madness of mankind's race toward dominance, even when defeat was certain. Now, it rests beneath 700 meters of Pacific water, its hull covered in coral, its guns silenced, its story half swallowed by the sea. But when the ocean currents pass through its broken hangar, and the sunlight filters down to touch its steel skin, you can almost imagine the engines coming alive again. The hum of power, the echo of footsteps, and the whisper of a captain giving one final order.